Okay, hi. So today we're going to be talking about my dive into Romantasy that I did over the past month-ish and kind of just talk about how that went. So I think that all of us can relate to this idea of being like, I don't like this genre or I don't like this type of thing in my books. And I do that as well, and sometimes I don't have a good why behind it, or maybe that why doesn't feel as relatable to me now as it once did, because we're constantly growing as people, hopefully, so that means our reading taste is probably constantly also evolving. So I decided to try Romantasy because I like fantasy and I like romance. And I have always liked those two things separately. And I vocalized that maybe not on my channel, but in my personal life. And so I wanted to test that assumption. So one thing that I don't want to do in this video is talk about what is Romantasy, because I think that that's a topic in itself that I am not informed enough to have a conversation about. But I will say that based off of my experience, I feel like we used to hear the term fantasy romance. We now hear people use the term romantasy. That is something that I think has come across more with social media, that publishers have kind of captured in order to try to sell books to people. And when it comes down to what a romantasy is, it's clearly some sort of mix between a fantasy plot, so you're still getting that action or momentum or fantasy feel of a book, and a romance at the core of it. But the variation of how much of each of those is in that and what people will recommend when you ask for Romantasy, it's a little different here and there. Another thing I don't want to do with this video is hate on people who like Romantasy. That's a popular thing to do online, and to shame people or to shame, I guess, women who read Romantasy. And while you may find at the end of the video that it's not the genre for me, that is not what we're intending to do here. So, yeah. So, I went down this path because I think this is a kind of funny reason I went down this path. I was 90% of the way through the book, The Israel Lobby, which is nonfiction, and I got it through an audiobook through my library, and it was going to take me 3 months to get it back. So then I downloaded a free 30-day trial of Kindle Unlimited, because it had been years since I had a free trial of Kindle Unlimited. So then I had it, and I was like, I should try to read more. And there is a ton of romance on Kindle Unlimited. So I started by reading Slaying the Vampire Conqueror by Carissa Broadbent. This is a standalone, and I picked it up because I also have a thing where I think I don't like vampire books, and that's the reason I picked this up as well. I wanted to kind of start questioning that, and it turned into questioning Romantasy instead. So I read this, and I was surprised by the amount of plot, because I read romance and I read erotica. And so, I read a lot of, super smutty erotica when I read romance. Less of the romance, more of the smut. So I thought that Romantasy would, get me on that. And this book did have that. And I was actually shocked by the amount of plot. There was plot. It was enemies to lovers, which seems to be another trend that you see in Romantasy. And it was fine. Plot happened, did all of the plot make sense? No. But was I reading it for the plot? No. I think that one thing that was a little weird was just when you have a romance, there is a sense of comfort in a lot of them, even like the erotica where like, you know, you have like safe words and stuff like that, like you're in a safe situation, even if it does have BDSM elements, like you're doing like people are doing stuff to like make the scene, make the space safe outside of like the, like even if you venture down like the paths of things being a little darker. This is like they're in war and like battles are happening type thing, and like we're just like boning here and there. Like everyone just died and we're like, yeah, like this is the time. And that's the thing that I noticed like happens in Romantasy, where I'm like, I don't know, I just don't really feel like 3 weeks into a quest, you're dirty and gross, you just were in a battle, like you have people's blood on you, like that's just like not the time. I don't know, like take a wash first. Anyway, so, but I enjoyed it enough to keep going down the path. So that was my first one. It was fine. I'm more commenting in this video in the things that I learned I didn't like, because I'm spoiling the video, but I've learned that I don't really like this genre. Okay, the next one I read was The Spellshop by Sarah Beth Durst, and this is my favorite from the list. This is a cozy romantasy, so it gives more contemporary romance energy, but it's in a world where like it's just in a fantasy world. It's in a made-up world where there's different sorts of creatures. The protagonist's best friend is a spider plant, which I loved and found very charming. It's like it takes place on an island, and there's this coziness happening. Because of something happening in this fantasy world, the protagonist is dealing with like grief of a thing that just happened to her, and like a insurrection type thing that just happened in a place that she's running from. So you do get like the fantasy stakes in that circumstance, and like that ties back into the plot of the world, but it's more of like this woman learning how to like navigate her life now, and she meets a guy, and like it's a meet cute kind of thing, but she's kind of annoyed with him at first. And I really liked this one. I like cozy fantasy and cozy sci-fi. I like the cozy energy where it kind of almost feels contemporary, but the world is not our world, and those elements add intrigue to the plot. This one was not hot and heavy, like it's a romance, so there's an HEA, a happily ever after. That's not a spoiler, that is what you assume happens in romances. Yeah, I overall actually really liked this one. It reminded me of the Travis Baldree books, in that this one had a little bit more romance elements that was much more at the forefront of the mind of the protagonist than in like Legends and Lattes. Okay, so now I'm thinking we're doing good. I checked the box. I was like, I liked this one. Let's keep going. And then I picked up A Broken Blade by Melissa Blair. Now, I picked this up because, first off, it's the genre itself, and the popular ones, I should say, of the genre are mainly by white female authors, which white female authors can write whatever they want. I was looking for a little bit of diversity in my reading. So this is by an Indigenous author from Canada. And this is a 4-book series, and the 4th book comes out in January, and I binged the 3 books. Now, were they good? okay, let's go through it. So I found these very, very readable, just like plowing through the plot. This is an enemies to lovers again. It has a very similar kind of setup to Slaying the Vampire Conqueror. I'm not sure if that's because of happenstance or if this is just a common setup where you have a woman who is like very dangerous and like has like a high leadership position in a way in this group of people who are fighting another group of people, and she's supposed to go take out a man, like the lead guy from the other side, and then they fall in love. Same thing happened in both of those. So not sure if that's circumstance, but the premise got tired for me like a little quick. The book itself frustrated me because the series, because it was traditionally published, and there were just so many unnecessary plot holes, just like weird discrepancies between things where it's like they wear their hoods and like they should always have their hoods on, and their identity is like they don't want people to know their identity, then versus like now suddenly they never have their hoods on and everyone knows their identity, and I'm like, but like why? That's just so easy to fix. And I think that this made me realize, like, a longer series, the romance has to get like extended, and then it's like no longer a romance in the same way that a romance novel is, where you kind of just have all your acts and then you get the epilogue and you live happily ever after. They're like together and they have to like go through a few more things, which like is more like real life. But I think that the problem I had with this series, aside from, the whole plot issues, is that like it didn't really do a good job as a romance, and it didn't really do a good job as a fantasy. So it was just kind of mid in both territories, and that's kind of how I feel about a lot of these. Like, there's, like, to me, like with the Spellshop, it was more romance focused, and it just happened to take place in a fantasy world. And so you weren't trying to create this like huge major fantasy plot. Whereas the other ones kind of were trying to do that, but aren't really balancing out the romance well. Like in this one, like the sex scenes were just like, it's kind of like, I don't know if people have read like the Greenbone Saga, but I really don't like the sex scenes in those, because it's just like a fantasy writer writing sex scenes like randomly, and they're just so clinical and like awkward to read. And like that happened a few times in like the Joe Abercrombie series too, and I'm just like, why are you guys writing sex scenes? Like, leave it to the romance authors. And then I read this and it's like supposed to be a romance, and like the sex scenes are super clinical, and I'm like, we built up to this? Like, it took until book 2 for this? And I've like never, it's really rare that I read a fantasy or like a romance and I'm just like waiting for the sex scene to end, because like, that's supposed to be like the people coming together and it came together, and it was like playing really awkward music, and you're just kind of watching like, okay. Anyway, so then that one didn't really work for me. And then I was like, okay, well, like, let's try to make it gay, because like all of these are like very heteronormative relationships. The protagonist in the Halfling series, the one I just mentioned, is bi, but like the bi representation isn't really on the page. So I'm like, I want like a core queer romance in my Romantasy. And there are not many of those. I went down, like they exist. A lot of them have really low ratings. For a romance, for a Romantasy, on Goodreads to have under 3.5, like that is rough. Even anything under 4, I would say is rough because I see romances get a lot higher ratings. So yeah, if the girlies aren't into it, like it's not gonna happen for me. So then I attempted, because I owned it, the Absinthe Underground, the Underground Absinthe. I wish that they didn't try to turn it into a fantasy. First off, has nothing to do with this taste test, but it's just the cover is not what the book is actually like. And so it's a little misleading because you're not spending much time in the Underground Absinthe. You spend like one day there. And then it's a quest novel, and they only have 3 days to do it, and they learn about it the 3 days before it needs to happen. And it's just like quest novels are such like a standard like trope of the fantasy genre, and like this idea of like that trope being rushed just for the sake of it, it fell very flat for me. And as a fantasy book, it just did not stand up. And I think that that's something that I could say for at least this and the last one. The fantasy elements, in my opinion, did not stand up on their own. And then the romance was just not enough for me to keep going in this. So I put it down. What have I learned? I've learned that I'm fine with a romance that has a magical setting. I don't want you to split the time between trying to sell yourself as a romance and trying to sell yourself as a fantasy. I think that my preference would be romances in fantasy settings and fantasies that have relationships that develop over time, and there's just like a romantic element to the story. You see that in Mistborn. You see that in The Faithful and the Fallen. You see that in the realm of the Elderling. Like, you see romances develop, but no one would call those books romances. They don't have to have sex on the page, and I think that that's another kind of element of that, where I think that when someone sells something as a romantasy, the assumption is that there's going to be a lot of action and a lot of sex on the page. I don't need those things to go together. I can read 2 different books for that. Interestingly enough, though, while I was kind of doing this experiment, I read Butcher and Blackbird by Brynne Weaver. This is a romance, but it's not like a contemporary romance because both of the protagonists are serial killers, and there's this like dark horror, comedic, satirical element to it where it's nonsensical. Like, you know that none of this stuff could actually be happening because like they would be caught. Like, they would be caught. But like, I think that's kind of the point, is that you're not supposed to take it too seriously. Then there's like a romance happening through them murdering people. And like, there's a plot that kind of happens outside of them. And like, that's cool. So I liked that. And so like, I think that when it comes to like the hybridization of like not reading a contemporary romance, but reading a romance that has like kind of something else happening, I do like that concept. I just don't want that to overpower the romance. And I want the book to have more of a focus, because at least in the ones that I've read for this experiment, when the focus is lost, neither of them stand up on their own. Future reads. I would love cozy fantasy romances. Like, I would love recommendations for those, because I think that those are a sweet spot for me. Okay, ones that I saw on lists online that I'm still interested in. So one of them is The Jasmine Throne by Sasha Turi. This I was surprised to see on the list because I've seen it before, and I've seen it kind of sold more as a romance or as a fantasy. And it's claiming that there's queer romantic elements. So this one seems more in line with like the Mistborn and stuff like that, where like there are romantic things happening, like the characters develop romantic relationships, but it wouldn't be classified as a romance. I could be wrong on that, but that's the vibe I'm picking up. And the third book, I think the last book, is coming out later this year. Okay, the next one is Her Spell That Binds Me. This is a sapphic Regency romance that has magic in it. And so I have not read really any historic romances. And so I think like the sapphic element, because like the heteronormative relationships, I'm like over at this point, even though I'm in one. The historic element and then like the magic in the historic kind of setting, I feel like would work for me from like a setting perspective. So anyway, that's how this taste test went. I think I'll keep doing this because it was kind of fun to kind of test the boundaries of what I like. I kind of have been doing this for YA, so it's probably the next one I'm going to film. But anyway, that is all I got for this video. So until next time, happy reading.